So in light of recent events with regards to the Logan trailer, I figured now would actually be a pretty good time to cover the first story arc of X-23 and All New All Different Marvel. And I had actually thought about skipping over this, but I think that for the sake of completion, it can't really be a bad thing to go ahead and just throw it in. At the very least, it gives us a more comprehensive understanding of where Laura Kinney resides, operating under the mantle of Wolverine in the All New All Different Marvel universe. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, again, All New All Different Marvel is not really a reboot so much as it is a continuation of things that took place before Secret Wars. And with X-23, of course, as we know with my video on her character, her origin story, and so on, she was created to be a clone of Wolverine, but she was made a female instead of a male due to the fact that the original genes that were supposed to be used to clone Wolverine had basically degraded. Now again, this all goes into the origin story of her character, which is a link you'll find down in the description, but the entire basis behind this is the idea that after, escaping from her original facility, spending time with the X-Men, spending time under tutelage of the original Wolverine, X-23 had run into this sort of existential crisis, I guess, in terms of her place in the Marvel Universe, and so she had effectively struck out on her own. Now, by striking out on her own, what it did is it gave Marvel the opportunity to kind of start moving her around to different teams and to different groups, having her interact with them and see which one proposed the best scenario for her character's placement within comics as far as fan reception and sales. But what this also did is it allowed Marvel to begin segueing her into a relationship with Warren Worthington. Now, something to keep in mind here is that this Warren Worthington is not the Warren that we're used to from Marvel Comics with regards to Archangel, his history with Apocalypse, and so on. This is the Warren Worthington, the younger version of Angel from the all-new X-Men line of stories. Now, for those of you guys who are relatively new to Marvel Comics, in the events leading up to the Secret Wars storyline, writer Brian Michael Bendis had introduced all-new X-Men in response to the modern-day Cyclops having gone awry and basically become Magneto. And the goal was for Beast to introduce them to their younger selves in hopes that it would sort of bring Cyclops back. It would show him who he used to be versus how far he's fallen. But what this did is it basically gave us a new line of X-Men publications, which actually proved to be pretty popular in the beginning. The all-new X-Men were wildly popular when they first came out. The stories kind of faltered here and there, but again, it gave us a younger Cyclops, it gave us a younger Iceman, which is what the new Iceman line of stories is based on. It gave us, a younger Warren Worthington. In the midst of their various interactions with the rest of the Marvel Universe, a budding relationship began to form, so to speak, between X-23 and Angel. And the idea that was kind of left to us is, will they get together? Will they not get together? But ultimately they did. And what this new line of All New Wolverine stories focuses on is partly Laura Kinney's life, but also how she interacts with her boyfriend, Warren. Now, the way the story initially picks up is it starts out in Paris, France, and we're not really given much of a backstory here, and in truth, we don't need to be, because this is really just an example of the story kind of kicking off in the midst of things that are already happening. But what ends up happening here with regards to Tom Taylor's writing is someone had basically tipped off Laura Kinney to the idea that an assassination was going to take place in Paris, France, and her goal was to try to prevent this assassination from happening. Now, the reason why Laura Kinney currently operates as a traditional superhero, which is to say fighting the good fight and not really being an anti-hero like the original Wolverine was because she's trying to distance herself from that history. She recognizes that she is a clone of the original Wolverine, but she's also come to believe that he made a lot of mistakes with regards to his life that led him to the point where he ended up dying after being encased in adamantium. And so for no other reason than the fact that she doesn't want to end up with the same fate, she's basically begun to move away. But at the same time, her history is a very dark one in the sense that as a child, she was forced into prostitution after escaping from the original facility. During her time in the facility, she was used to kill various people. And so even if it's not directly tied into attempting to eliminate the same fate as Wolverine himself, it can also be assumed that she's trying to effectively outrun her past, that she's trying to move away from who she used to be and become somebody else in its entirety. Now, because of the fact that she's trying to stop this assassination, having all the same powers as Wolverine with a couple differences in terms of how her claws exist, in the sense that she has a claw in her feet as opposed to the original Wolverine, who only had 3 in his hands and she has 2 in her hands. For the most part, she still functions in the same capacity. But while she tries to save this man who, has had a hit put on his life, she ends up being shot with a rocket. And so when she comes to, it seems as though she's died, and she actually encounters the original Wolverine. Now, this was a very important moment in the all-new Wolverine line of stories. And the reason why I say that is because not everyone who liked Laura Kinney liked her being the new Wolverine. There were some people that just wanted to see her stay her own character. They wanted to see her stay as X-23, trying to find her place in the world, and they wanted to see the original James Howlett stay as Wolverine. But the idea of having this conversation between the two of them is effectively, James Howlett passing the torch, saying, I'm not Wolverine Wolverine anymore, I'm dead. You are now Wolverine. Not only that, he also goes on to tell her that he's made a lot of mistakes, or he did make a lot of mistakes when he was alive. He killed a lot of people. Sometimes he killed them in anger, but he was really more prone to acting irrationally or acting on his own impulses, as opposed to thinking things through and being intelligent and, you know, having a strong mind when it came to whether or not he needs to actually do something. X-23 is not that way. She's intelligent. She thinks her decisions out. She doesn't just pop her claws, go into a frenzy, and start tearing stuff up. And so he basically says that she is better than he ever was, that she's a much better version of Wolverine than he was. Now again, this is why this was a source of contention among fans, because the die-hard James Howlett fans did not want to see this happen, and they were angry about this idea. They were outraged at the idea that Wolverine would cast himself aside even after dying and say, you can be the new Wolverine now. I'm not that great. I was never that great of a superhero. You are better than I was. A lot of traditional Wolverine fans, you know, James Howlett fans didn't like that, but the fact remains, this is Tom Taylor basically telling us that for the foreseeable future, the original James Howlett is never going to come back. The new Wolverine is Laura Kinney. The new Logan is Old Man Logan. And that's just pretty much where the all-new, all-different Marvel landscape resides right now. Now that may change later on. I mean, you know, in comic books, people come back all the time. And so it's entirely possible the original Wolverine may return. But for right now, we have Laura Kinney. And so after she comes to, she also realizes that the rocket was shot from the top of the Eiffel Tower. And so she dons her Wolverine costume, much to the surprise of almost everybody around her, and she immediately descends to the top of this place. Now this is where Tom Taylor starts to spin out into the story and start building a bigger picture. Because for Laura Kinney, she doesn't kill unless she has to, which is a huge difference between her and the original James Howlett. Again, the original James Howlett would kill, no questions asked. For Laura Kinney, she doesn't do that. She tries to talk things out. She tries to be a good person. And this is what happens throughout this entire conflict with this unknown person. She says, look, like, you have to stop. We can talk about this. We can figure out what's going on. If you're being forced to do this, we can bring you away from that situation, take you in hiding, you know, whatever the case may be. But then suddenly in the midst of their conflict, they're set upon by what seemed to be French police. And so in the midst of this unnamed person basically says that, you know, she doesn't feel pain. She doesn't feel any sort of feeling whatsoever. And while it does take Laura Kinney by surprise, this unknown person jumps off the Eiffel Tower and seems to effectively commit suicide. Now, while X-23 also jumps off in an effort to escape, she's again rescued by the younger version of Warren, by, you know, the all-new X-Men's Warren Worthington. And so this is basically Tom Taylor refreshing us, saying, yes, the two of them are in a relationship together. They are a couple. And while they do, you know, engage in a little bit of relation here and there in terms of how they talk to one another and so on, it's also Tom Taylor's telling us that Warren Worthington is as much a supporting character in her line of stories as he is, you know, a member of the Marvel Universe in and of itself. And so when a drone seems to have been sent to destroy this person who's in this limousine, the person who was supposed to be assassinated, when Laura Kinney intercepts it, of course, she comes crash landing down to the ground. And again, she does have some injuries and nothing real, you know, nothing really terrible here that she can't escape from. But this allows Tom Taylor to have her and Warren travel to the corpse of the girl who jumped off the Eiffel Tower. And it's revealed to us that X-23 had suspected this but wasn't sure. But it's revealed that this girl is basically X-23, that she seems to be a clone. And so the question that Laura Kinney has is, where did she come from? Who did this? And who made her? And so in her investigations, in her search to find answers, this leads her to a place called Alchemax Genetics. Now, within Marvel Comics, you have several corporations that are very seedy and do some really bad things. Roxxon is basically at the top of the list. Roxxon is about as bad as it gets when it comes to corporations. They're engaged in corruption, assassinations, all different kinds of things. There's especially a main focal point right now in Jason Aaron's run of The Mighty Thor, which is amazing. But, you know, with regards to the X-23 line of stories, Alchemax has its own prison complex. Alchemax really has its fingers in everything, but Alchemax Genetics is really this new concept in the sense that they've begun diving into the realm of cloning people or creating enhanced humans. And so what happens is that when X-23 gets here, Alchemax is a little suspicious owing to the idea that, you know, whoever these people are that are engaging in these assassinations, because they look like Laura Kinney, you know, Alchemax's idea is that they may try to infiltrate the genetics compound. And so to this guy, you know, Captain Mooney, he basically cuts Laura Kinney with the idea of verifying that it's actually her, simply because these people who are clones of her do not seem to have healing factors, hence the reason that girl died when she jumped off the Eiffel Tower. And so when Laura Kinney's cut and she heals, the indication here is that it is Laura Kinney. And so from here, Captain Mooney takes her to a guy named Robert Chandler. And Robert Chandler is kind of like the, you know, the Abraham Cornelius / John Sublime of Alchemax, in the sense that, you know, Abraham Cornelius and John Sublime were the ones behind the original James Howlett being transformed into Wolverine by way of the Weapon X project. With this particular Alchemax Genetics situation, Robert Chandler is the one who's heading the show. And what he says is that because of the capabilities of X-23 because she was such a formidable character in her own right that after the death of James Howlett, after the death of the original Wolverine, because he was encased in adamantium and there's no way of cracking adamantium once it hardens, it was impossible to access his genes. And so they looked to Laura Kinney as the next best thing, which in truth, she very much is. She's pretty much the next best thing from Wolverine himself, and in some cases, maybe better, depending on, what situation we're talking about. But the idea was to clone her, and then for these clones to be used for various reasons. Now, the idea that Alchemax is putting forward is that these clones were not going to be used for nefarious purpose. They were going to be used as bodyguards, so that when, diplomats went on various missions across seas, or when they went into the public, that there would basically be a Laura Kinney beside them to ensure their protection. But what he also tells us is that they are not the same as X-23 in the sense that they don't have healing factors, in the sense that they don't have claws. And so they do have the same fighting prowess, but according to Robert Chandler, they lack all the other capabilities that Laura Kinney has. And so the task that's been set to X-23, to All-New Wolverine, is to basically track these girls down in order to try to bring them back in. Now, where Alchemax does send, I guess, a couple agents after her to basically follow her and to lead them to where these girls are, X-23 is able to take them out immediately. But following this, she travels back to her place of residence, to her own apartment in the Bronx. But when she gets there, she also picks up a scent that she doesn't recognize, only to find out that there's a young girl named Gabby inside. Now, Gabby is a girl that we talked about during our discussion on, X-23 versus Old Man Logan, but that was the second volume of the X-23 line of stories. And so what this does is this allows us to actually provide some clarity on Gabby's character. For those of you guys who were asking questions on what her basis is, what her backstory is and where she came from. And so Gabby being here is designed, or I guess she's here of her own intention, but she also tells us that she was basically the one that sent the note, the anonymous letter to X-23 telling her that, one of the sisters, one of these four girls who would escape this compound was going to assassinate that man. In addition to this, we also learned that when these four girls escaped, that because they had been subjected to such heinous acts at the behest of Alchemax prison, their goal was to basically kill off all these different people from Alchemax Genetics. Their goal was to basically bring Alchemax Genetics crashing to the ground with their sights set ultimately on Robert Chandler. And so again, this is an instance whereby Gabby is trying to let X-23 know what's going on, but then tries to make an escape by telling Laura Kinney that she had set her room on fire. But when Laura Kinney comes back after realizing that it's just a plate with, a burning napkin, Gabby seems to have escaped. Now, because of the fact that Laura Kinney has such a strong sense of smell, because again, she has all the capabilities as the original Wolverine, she basically tracks down Gabby and she finds them in the sewers below New York. And when she gets there, she finds three other sisters that are taking up residence, and these are the ones that basically escaped. Now, we will learn a little more about them as things go on, but these sisters are very, very skeptical of what's going on. It doesn't seem as though they initially know that this is Laura Kinney, but they pick up on this fact almost immediately. Not only that, they basically shoot her and subdue her. Now, this is really important because it tells us a couple things. When it comes to the character of Wolverine, depending on who's writing the story, sometimes Wolverine's completely unfazed by bullets, and other times Wolverine is fazed by bullets. When it comes to Laura Kinney, it's much the same way. There's been times where Laura Kinney's been shot and bullets don't faze her whatsoever. She's been shot in the head and she's fine. There's been other times like this where she's shot and she falls unconscious. So don't really take this particular situation of her being knocked out by way of bullets as an absolute truth, because in comics, it really just depends on who it is that's writing the story at the time. But when she comes to, she's basically tied up by the sisters and they begin interrogating her, but they also begin saying things like what Laura Kinney's been told isn't necessarily 100% accurate. If she's being told something by Alchemax Genetics, then there's more to the picture regardless of what it was that they said to her, indicating that Alchemax has their own, agenda, goals that they're trying to achieve by taking these sisters back. But before this conversation can continue any further, the group is suddenly met by the arrival of Captain Mooney. Now, of course, Laura Kinney had picked up his arrival. She'd heard his troops coming. She'd picked up his scent and warned the rest of the sisters to arm themselves because there was going to be a conflict. But once these soldiers arrive, again, the other sisters have no qualms with killing every single one of these guys. But Laura Kinney tries to tell them not to. She says, look, you have to stop killing them. You can't just kill people like this. There's always a better way to solve your problems. The issue with this is that once all these people are subdued and once Captain Mooney is left unconscious, where one of the sisters, where B'Elanna basically intends to deal the killing blow to Captain Mooney, the group's suddenly met by the arrival of Taskmaster. Now, there are certain circles in Marvel Comics of fans who love Taskmaster. He's actually a pretty cool villain, to be honest, but Taskmaster's claim to fame is that he's quite possibly the best fighter in the entirety of Marvel Comics. X-23, we're actually going to see here in a little bit, is able to get the upper hand, but when it comes to a long drawn out fight between a person and Taskmaster, Taskmaster will almost always gain the upper hand. And the reason why is because his fighting style is a mishmash of almost all fighting styles in existence, not to mention that the longer he fights a person, the more he basically becomes them in their fighting style. He's able to predict their movements, he's able to know what moves they're going to make, counter those moves accordingly. He's very prodigious, not to mention, he's basically the trainer for almost every single supervillain that has the ability to fight with any sort of martial arts or any real fighting prowess of any kind. And so during this conflict with X-23, he immediately starts to get the upper hand. He's basically able to counter her every single blow. But when he blocks one of her feet, she suddenly sends one of her claws out and pierces his hand. And this was actually pretty funny to me. It was actually pretty hilarious in the sense that he was going through saying, you know, I can counter every move you make, I can predict every single one of your moves, and then as soon as he grabs her foot, her claw pops out and punctures his hand. And so because of this, you know, she seems to knock him unconscious, you know, and leave him there. And while the other sisters do intend to kill, you know, Taskmaster, in the end, they basically just shoot him in the kneecaps so that he can't follow them. For the most part, he basically can't track them down. And so what they do is they jump into a vehicle, and it seems as though they're going to make their escape, either traveling back to Alchemax or at the very least, you know, give Laura Kinney the ability to kind of talk them down. But in the midst of all this, they're tracked yet again by Captain Mooney. And this is when X-23 comes to the realization that Captain Mooney, when he had gone and he had cut her in order to verify who she is, had actually planted a tracking device inside of her arm, which is how they were able to locate her in the first place when they were in the sewers below New York. And so during this time, she's able to cut the tracking device out, but not only that, because it seems that she's the only one that has any real measure of fighting prowess, in addition to a healing factor and adamantium claws, she basically tells the other sisters to go about their business, you know, to get out of the way, and she'll take care of Captain Mooney, which she is successful in doing. She's successful in incapacitating him, basically just kind of leaving him there. And so after this, we pick up with the other sisters, one of whom seemed to have been injured in the extreme. And so because of the fact that Laura Kinney herself is not a doctor, because she doesn't know how to treat a person effectively, and because this version of Laura Kinney does not have a healing factor, they basically travel to the residence of Doctor Strange. Now, this is one of the coolest moments in the story. Because it shows us just how crazy things get in the realm of Doctor Strange. When they go into his office, one of the funny things is B'Elanna keeps saying that the cupboard is winking at her, which is entirely possible. In the home of Doctor Strange, there's God only knows what's gonna happen inside that place. It's absolutely crazy. But when Doctor Strange comes out, he's kind of shocked to see that there are basically 3 girls inside this home that look exactly like Laura Kinney. And so his first question is, who are these girls? And then he uses his Eye of Agamotto to look into who they are, look into their past, and begins to realize that yes, they are clones of Laura Kinney, but they are also people who have been manipulated and who have been controlled in a multitude of different ways for their own ends of Alchemax. And so what ends up happening here is Doctor Strange ultimately agrees to help after looking into the past of Laura Kinney and seeing that she came from the same history as these girls. But Laura Kinney was able to harness this rage that she had and use it for something constructive. And so the idea is that these girls can do the same thing as well. But in the midst of their conversation, we suddenly hear gunshots from the other room. And when they go in there, they realize that B'Elanna was freaking out over the cupboard that was winging at her and shot the cupboard. And in doing so, had basically broken the seal of this cupboard, which houses what Doctor Strange refers to as horrors, which just unleashes this massive monster. And so in response, he throws Laura Kinney an axe, and the other sisters are able to basically subdue this giant monster. But it was really entertaining to me because I like what's going on with Doctor Strange, where he's not super serious. He's actually, you know, partly comedic and partly serious in these stories, but it's also really entertaining to see all these different things, you know, kind of unfold and be explored on their own. But the fact remains here that because Doctor Strange is at his core, you know, a neurosurgeon, despite the fact that he is really more of the Sorcerer Supreme than anything else, he basically teleports the group to a hospital, and he takes, you know, Laura Kinney alongside Zelda into this room, and they begin going through and trying to figure out a way to bring Zelda, you know, to make her healthy again. But what we find out is that Zelda isn't necessarily dying because of her injuries. Zelda's dying because she has nanites inside of her body. And so what Doctor Strange says is this is beyond his ability to take care of, that what they need is someone who is well-versed in science that can enter the body of Zelda and combat all these nanites and effectively just get rid of them in their entirety. And so what happens is he teleports them away to the base of operations for Janet Van Dyne, for the Wasp. And so once they get there, they basically explain the situation that, X-23 had come across these 3 sisters that she has. One of them named Zelda had been injured in an escape from soldiers of Alchemax Genetics, and that in the midst of all this, that, Zelda was injured and she's basically dying. And so, of course, she petitions Janet Van Dyne to help her. Janet Van Dyne, doesn't really agree with this in the sense that the initial mission was to actually steal the Ant-Man suit, but because Janet Van Dyne is willing to help here, they basically jump in and they begin going through the body of Zelda in order to find out where these nanites are coming from, what their purpose is, and get rid of them. The problem with this is that as they're fighting these nanites suddenly start sending out basically a homing beacon to Alchemax Genetics, which allows Captain Mooney and his forces to track down Laura Kinney and these 3 sisters. And so while the efforts of Laura Kinney and Janet Van Dyne inside the body of Zelda are successful in being able to destroy a large enough number of these nanites that they can help cure her of whatever it is that's killing her, in the end, the arrival of Captain Mooney and his forces means the death of Zelda, when Gabby does what she can to hold off Captain Mooney but is thrown off, and in response, Captain Mooney shoots Zelda in the face, killing her on the spot. And so following this, the sisters are effectively fed up. They're basically at a point now where they realize that there doesn't seem to be any way to get past what it is that Alchemax wants to do, aside from killing these girls. And so in the end, they basically switch outfits. That X-23 switches outfits with B'Elanna, and in return, they travel to the facility of Alchemax with the intention of allowing them to kill who they believe to be X-23 and then take the other sisters. And so when X-23 gets to the facility, because of the fact that she's disguised as B'Elanna, as soon as she goes in, the soldiers in Alchemax prison kill her right off the bat. But because of the fact that this is X-23, she has a healing factor. And so once they take her to the base underground, once they seem to believe that she's dead, she immediately, allows her healing factor to kick in. She comes back and she goes through and starts attacking almost everybody she sees. Not only that, she's able to make it to the security room and open the gates for the rest of the sisters to come in and begin going through and start attacking the remainder of Alchemax Genetics. And so for the most part, this is really just Tom Taylor kind of wrapping things up, showing us that it doesn't seem as though there was any real solution to this aside from, defeating Robert Chandler and bringing Alchemax Genetics down. Now again, X-23 doesn't kill Robert Chandler because this is very much against her moral code. Instead, she incapacitates him. And while Gabby did want to kill, Robert Chandler, while she was very close to killing him, what she also does here is she pops a claw. And this tells us that she does have claws, that contrary to what X-23 had been told, contrary to what Laura Kinney had been told, Gabby does still seem to have the same abilities as she does. And in hindsight to the end of the story, it actually makes sense, because if you guys notice along the way, there was never an instance when Gabby was injured, when she was shot, when she ever really engaged in any real measure of combat. Instead, she was usually off to the side, and it made sense at the time due to the fact that, well, she's a little girl, what could she possibly offer to the situation? And so we just kind of assumed that was the case, but it never really dawned on me that Tom Taylor was building up towards something bigger. And so because of the fact that she does have the ability to pop claws, because it seems as though she does have a healing factor, something to also keep in mind is she doesn't immediately tell X-23 this. This is the reason why when we covered our story on Old Man Logan versus X-23, that Gabby had popped her claws and shown, Laura Kinney that she did have, claws, which took Laura by surprise. But the fact remains that because of the fact that B'Elanna seems to have escaped and X-23 has essentially taken Gabby under her wing to teach her how to be a hero on her own, that B'Elanna, I guess her actions pick up with someone that she's talking to and we don't know who it is. But we learn that this person is basically Kaimura, who was the original handler for X-23 during her time in the facility, which indicates that she's going to play a much larger role in the future of the All-New Wolverine line of stories. But with that being said, we're going to bring this to an end. If you guys enjoyed this, let me know how you guys feel about, the current run of All-New Wolverine in Marvel Comics. I'm actually a little curious here. And if you guys are new to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button, become part of the Rob Corps, and drop a like. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.